Welcome to Mastering Modern Midlife. I'm Katherine Grace O'Connell, and this show is powered by the Forever Fierce Revolution. I am so delighted to welcome my guest today. Joe McQuillen is a father, a husband, and now an author. An author of My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. Welcome to the show, Joe. I am so excited to have you and have you share this incredible story.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm delighted to be here.
We've known each other a long time. I don't even know how long, but a long time. Yeah. Sally, your wife, is one of my very dear friends. And as I was just saying to you before we started the show, I thought it would be her here with her book and talking about like all this kind of stuff. This is a metaphysical book, which you will, share. Metaphysical is not scary and woo. It just means beyond this physical world that we're in. But I thought that would be Sally sitting there, and it will be her, just not yet.
I think it will be her too, and I'm as surprised as anybody. Mm-hmm. There's a line from the movie, the Camelot, that said that sometimes all that's left to do is play out your parts and leave the fates to God. So something occurred that was triggered by the drowning of my precious son that propelled me in this direction. But like you, I'm a little surprised it's me being the ambassador to this.
You are an ambassador, and a quite, like you said, unlikely and unusual ambassador. Here dressed in like golf attire and from the North Shore of Chicago, which is very unwoo.
I did wear long pants, which was a big step for this weekend. So.
Yeah. So, Joe, let's go back, because obviously this the reason that you're here. This book is, you guys, I cannot recommend it highly enough. Clearly, a lot of women in our audience have lost loved ones. Many children, many partners, just a lot of loss and grief by the stage of life we're in, midlife. So let's go back to the beginning. I remember getting the call, obviously, of what had happened by Sal, and let's talk about why you're here.
Okay, so in Christmas of 2015, all the local kids, college kids, were home for the Christmas vacation, and on the last weekend before they were all going back to school, January 2016, a dozen of these New Trier kids all ventured up to Lake Beulah in Wisconsin to kick up their heels, last hurrah before college, and drink too much, act out. But Sally and I were a little relieved because it was going to be in this bucolic setting of, a lake house in Wisconsin, and in a safe environment. No driving, no big city.
You think a safe environment,
right? What felt like a safe environment. So Sunday morning, I was got up and did some work and was getting ready to watch a football game, and I anticipated Chris coming home so we could watch the game together, which we would do whenever he was in town. I grew up in Buffalo, and he was a big Bills fan, as I was, and which was wonderful. And as time approached, he wasn't there. I texted him a couple times, like, "Hey, pal, where are you? What's going on?" And I got a text from a friend of his who owned the beach house or the lake house. His parents did, Scotty, and he texted that Chris and 3 friends are missing. And so I grabbed the dog and a jacket and boots and jumped in the Jeep and really felt that I was going to drive up and either bail him out of jail for disorderly conduct or find him in a boathouse with a co-ed, or some friends just got, overserved and fell asleep somewhere. I did not think this was going to be the journey that it ended up being. And in hindsight, Sally's told me the minute that she knew that, got that text as a mom, she knew that he was gone. And so halfway up the hour plus drive, I get a call from Scotty's uncle, who said that it was no longer a search but a recovery, that all 4 boys had drowned. And so everything went into a bit of a shock, obviously, in hindsight. I continued to drive up and got there and waited for the bodies to be found. Police officers and lights and boats out on the lake, dredging the lake looking for it. And there was, like I said, a dozen kids out there. So there was 8 kids in a corner all crying. And they had gotten up, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and didn't know where these other boys were. and probably a little afraid to report it and hope that they would just come back. And then one of them saw an overturned canoe. And what they did is what I would do at 21, I think. They walked outside. They had a snoot full of drinking all day, jumped in four of them, took their
in a 3-person
phone. They took their phones out so they didn't get it wet, put them on the dock, and four of them jumped in a 3-man canoe with Timberland boots that they all loved called Timmy's, Tim's, unlaced, of course, layered clothing because it was winter, and paddled out, and perfect storm, perfect storm, roughhousing. So they wouldn't let me see my boy. They had me go downstairs and identify a picture. And the other families were kind of huddled together, and I just kept a distance. And when it was clear what this was, I started making phone calls and went home and started preparing for the things that had to be done.
So the call that you got was that call that is every parent's worst nightmare. Chris was young. He was 21. You'd had many experiences in a short life of some fear that something could potentially happen. What is Sally's saying, that it was like, he was always like slipping through your fingers. It was hard.
Water going through your hands.
Water going through your hands.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that moment that you knew he was gone.
She knew it earlier. I knew it when they told me he was gone. He was reckless and fun and sweet, and so he'd had a couple of near-death experiences. He was working. He went to Imbalance Ranch Academy, which was a boarding school based on 12 steps for kids with addiction problem and behavior problem. And I sit on that board of directors now, and I address the boys every year and go out for the fundraiser, and it's one of my favorite days of the year, because I see him and every one of those kids, all 40 of those kids, and so we'd send out a pickup truck so he could go from Tucson to the ranch where he'd work, and they would work like firemen. They'd be 2 days on and 3 days off. And one day late, 6 o'clock morning to get to the ranch, he flipped this thing. He flipped this pickup truck, S-type pickup, which was light. This ranch road is pretty tough to maneuver. Flipped it completely with a buddy of his who also worked at the ranch in the passenger side, and he sprained his wrist. The other kid, and Chris didn't have a scratch on him, and they walked away. And subsequently, I was told that the angels had carried him. Another time, he was up in Havasupai, and he was helping one of the leaders with boys hiking and doing some pool jumping and such. And it was a bad mistake. The leader made a decision to let him go into caves without the lighted hats that they normally do. Chris fell down a 30-foot mine shaft. Actually, it was a 100-foot mine shaft. It was a 30-foot to a ledge that he landed on, and banged up real badly. And when I got out there, by the time the first surgery, my dear friend Mike Sawyer lived in Scottsdale and Cave Creek, and drove up and kind of took the bull by the horns. And it was in Flagstaff. And the scary thing, Kath, was we got the call that said he'd been in this horrific accident. And my first question is he paralyzed? And they said they're being airlifted in a helicopter. If he goes to Flagstaff, there's no paralysis. If he goes to Las Vegas, there's probably paralysis. So we got 45 minutes. At the time, the longest 45 minutes of my life. It was eclipsed later on, but it was the longest 45 minutes of my life that they called and said he was in Flagstaff, and they don't suspect any paralysis. So my friend Mike goes up there, and he said it was like a mass unit. It was just a horrible, horrible scene.
There's a picture of him in the book.
And he was messed up, and they just weren't equipped for this. And so Mike said, "Night, what a sweetheart." He started calling me Uncle Mike after that, just the same way he called his godfather Uncle Mike. Mike said, "Look, I'm taking this kid somewhere else." And he said, "You don't have authority." And he said, not a big guy, but he said, "This kid and I are leaving. What you want to do about it is your business. But over you, around you, either way, he's leaving." Got him to Scottsdale Osborne, where they treated him, with the love and care that he deserved. And I got there the next afternoon as he was coming out of the first surgery, and stayed with him for that week. And but he talked later on about the guy down there with the all white who was with him. There wasn't anybody down there.
Another angel.
It was another angel.
Another angel.
So he'd been protected a couple of times. Why this time the hall's pass didn't work? I don't know.
Well, that really leads us into your journey, and this is a metaphysical journey.
Yeah.
And you talk about in the book, all these wild things that you're learning from the other side, exit points, potential exit points that we have. So he had 2 near-death experiences. It's like 3 strikes, you're out. So the 3rd strike was clearly what happened in the boat.
Right.
But you also share in there that from what you understand, there was potentially a moment there where he potentially could have come back.
We were told that as he was leaving this world, that there was an opportunity to return. And it's a great subject. Nobody's addressed this before. And that his personality was the same when he was crossing as it was here. And the moment passed without him making a decision, which was not unusual for my ADD boy who gets that from his old man. And then the opportunity was gone. It evaporated. He had that one choice to come back. And even recently, we were told that one of the reasons he couldn't have returned to his body is he couldn't have lived with the guilt of surviving something that took 3 of his friends, and that would have ruined his life. So there's a plan out there. I don't think it's pre-designated, but there's a plan, and free will is part of that plan.
And you talk about that as well. There was a point in time, clearly anybody who goes through an experience like this, I cannot imagine because that's never happened to me.
Good.
But the anger and all those emotions that come up. So you were angry at God, and you're a very, spiritual person who's on the AA track. So let's talk about that and how you had a message that shifted your perspective.
I was, at the time I was 30 years sober, and I'm 33 years sober now, so almost 30 at the time. And every night, to this day, I get on my knees and I thank God for my sobriety, which was a gift, and I thank God for my family. But after Chris drowned, I would get on my knees the 3 following nights, and I would thank God for my sobriety and my family, and I'd say, but I'm PO'd, you took my kid. I'm grateful for what you've given me, but let's not pretend we're good here, you and me. So this went on this was my routine for a few days. And then on the 4th day, I got in bed and was given this revelation, literally a voice from God, not unlike the voice that I got from Chris later on, which came through like dictation, that said, I didn't take your son. His free will and recklessness caused him to come home early. I welcomed him, but I didn't take him. And remember, he said, I lost a son too. So it was at that moment, Kat, that I knew that God wasn't this protagonist punishing me for past sins by taking my beautiful son. He was the energy that was keeping me above water as I was step by step putting plan in effect to get my son buried, to get a reception, get a funeral, get a mass, get a burial plot, all of that. And I knew I now had an advocate instead of a protagonist fighting me on that.
That's a powerful shifting moment in your life. Huge, enormous. So you're able to see things differently. So the book.
Yeah.
The book is not something that you actually wrote by yourself. You had some help here. Every
keystroke, every paragraph was my boy with me in my office, which was his bedroom. His energy flows freely there. 16 years before, I had ventured into meeting a medium that somebody recommended, angel therapy medium. And I was like, And I went there, and for the first 40 minutes, it was pretty mundane. Your grandmother's here. She says you should sing more. And it was like, yeah, great. I got to go write a deal somewhere. And but at the very end, she said to me, your dad's here. He's holding a caboose, and he's saying railroad. Now, you got to understand, our culture was a railroad family. Dad was 40 years on the railroad. All 5 boys worked on the railroad in college. We were a railroad family. That cold steel was what we were. And my dad's nickname was Iron Joe, and there's a chapter to Iron Joe, who I adored and still adore. And he's with my son right now. So when she said this, there was typical Iron Joe. Dad was not verbose. Dad did not have long sentences. He would say something, and a lot of it was loving, although he was tough as hell. And Iron Joe said railroad. So I took that information that not only is my dad somewhere else, but he has the ability to connect. He didn't need to tell me more. There were some other incidents where he made himself known. I filed that away. And 16 years later, when I needed it, I was able to push the recall button and reach out to that same medium. And her name was Nancy Myers, and she used to live in like Arlington Heights. And she, 10 years since, moved to Surprise, Arizona. And we stayed in contact, and I reached out to her. She told me some amazing things about the accident that I didn't know, that I found later on when I got the report, that she knew because Chris was telling her, including untied boots, the water, the ice giving way. I mean, things, the rough housing. And so all of a sudden it was this place that I accepted that my dad is now where my son is making his way to or already there.
So what was the first moment that Chris came through?
The first moment that Chris came through was a few days after he crossed. And Nancy on the phone was absolutely astonished that somebody that new could communicate. And he came through pretty well. And a lot of it was to tell us he loved us. He was horribly sad about the grief he caused. And that it was a dumb mistake. And tell Mom it was just a mistake. Now, nobody thought that 4 kids went out on the suicide pact. You know what I mean? But that he needed us to know. And he actually said, because he was usually the one who planned these ill-advised ventures, that he said, Dad, this one wasn't even my idea. I just went along. That was important. He wanted me to know that he didn't take his life. That he's so sorry. And an interesting thing is, Kath, for the first 6 months, we got a lot of, I'm so horribly sorry. And then later on, we were told by a medium, and then later on him, that he made peace with that. And that's not part of his being now, that he's good and that isn't plaguing him on the other side anymore.
So he got to the point of forgiving himself through where he is on the other side.
Right.
So so he's coming through the medium.
Yeah.
And I know then you went through a process of seeing multiple mediums, which you share in the story. Where did it come through so loud and clear that this was a mission? This book was a mission between the two of you?
Not yet. At this point in time, I was taking notes. And I was taking notes so that at some point in time, I could review them sitting on a porch to feel close to my son. I've still got high 8 videos from the time he was a baby, right? I've still got those tapes that I haven't been able to watch yet, right? So it's not that I haven't gotten that far yet, kiddo, but I wanted evidence of this information that I had so I could review it as I was getting closer. And so I kept this data up. I kept taking all these notes, dating them, stapling them, putting in a file. They're still in a file in my office. But a real interesting thing was I wanted to see a medium in person because Nancy was great. And like all good mediums, she would say things like, you can't keep calling back. We can't do this all the time. You've got to work on that. And at some point, you won't even need me, right?
And clearly, that's where you are today.
Right. Well, I still use media.
You still, but you also, but I mean, you have your direct channel.
I do.
You do.
I do. So I went and I looked up on Bob Olson wrote a phenomenal book, and he was an investigator who decided to try to see if it was bunk or real and to reach his dad, wrote this amazing book about it. There's some great books, and there's some.
Well, you have one here.
Yeah.
You have one right here. I didn't know that there was an idiot's guide, but here we go.
Idiot's Guide to Communicating with Spirits.
There we go. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
The thing is, we've got to do some work. You can't sit back and say, well, I'm ready for you to connect. Yes. You've got to do a little work. So, interesting thing, I looked on this website. Andrew Anderson was in Hoffman Estates. I had no idea who he was. I read some reviews. And like a chef or a baseball or a carpenter, you get reviews to see, if it looks like it's going to be fun or good or talented. And he got some good reviews. So I made an appointment, always in the back of my mind that I could cancel, right? I mean, I'm not locked into anything. I don't like being locked in it. So I was always ready to cancel. So the morning I went to see Andrew, nobody knew this. It wasn't that I was hiding this, but nobody knew this. I had ordered some Shamrock seeds from Amazon that I wanted to plant around his grave. Now, another funny part of the story is that I wasn't happy where he was buried. We went there and the ground was covered with snow, and we bought 6 plots, my buddy and Mike and I, Let's figure we divide them up later. And of those 6, where should we bury Chris? I thought this would be great right here on the end. Well, unbeknownst to us, there was a family called the Sheridans, a husband and wife, Dr. Sheridan and his wife, right next to there. And when the snow melted and I went out there, and I'd been going out back and forth, but the gravestone wasn't there yet because they had to wait for the ground to soften. Mm-hmm. I went out there, and his plot was right next to another couple. And I was livid. It was like, one thing, this is my kid.
This is my boy. This
my
is
boy.
Mm-hmm.
And when people go to visit, so it wasn't going to do. This won't do. So I called them and arranged to have a moved over one. I'll occupy that spot. I never wanted anybody else in the spot that my son was in for a couple months. I'll occupy that spot. I moved them over. So the ground was now soft. It was loose dirt. They planted this beautiful headstone that has a Celtic cross and the logo of the Buffalo Bills on it. And I'm there all the time. And it's not some old guy feeding pigeons, being pathetic. I go there to communicate with my beautiful boy. I smoke a cigar. I bring my dog.
It's an experience.
I run it half the time. I end up running, and my wife come and going. I keep a bag where I clean up with the grave site. I'm meticulous about it. And it's an important place for our energy. So that day I planted the shamrock seeds. Walking out the door, I grabbed a bracelet that he'd given me in Disney World when he was 3 or 4 years old. It said Dad on it, had Goofy on the clasp. And it sat in my dresser for,
forever.
16, 17 years. Put it on. Went to see Andrew. Andrew said to me, I wanted to see pictures of Chris. And said, boy, he's beautiful. He said, he's here. He said he's glad that y'all celebrated his birthday the way you always did in April, which we did by going to Rana, Japan. He said, I'm glad you're continuing that. He said, Christopher said you were at his grave planting something today. What were you planting? Nobody knew. Sally didn't know. Nobody knew. It was just because they came, the ground was, I planted it that day. He said, he's also happy that you're wearing the bracelet he gave you. Right? And this was 10 minutes into this, and I was hooked. And I'm looking into the eyes, Kat, of somebody looking into my son.
Right at your son.
Right. And
so moving.
I was at that point hooked. Later on, through advice of my bright wife, I started recording those instead of handwriting. That way I could be very present when I'm getting this recording. Then I'd go transcribe them, put them in a file, put them away. So I didn't expect it to be a book. A year after, a very interesting part was the anniversary of the first year. It was the first time I got a direct message from him. And I still wasn't thinking I'm writing this other than for myself. So 3 o'clock in the morning is when I get up, or when he wakes me up. I don't get up out, but still 2 or 3 times a month we go through this. I'll wake up, I'll get a calling that's just unsettling. Wake up, throw a little water on my face, go into my office, and light sage, realign my chakras. Who would have thought, right?
Yes, we're talking chakras here.
I'm a blue-collar kid from Buffalo, New York.
I talk chakras with Sally. I didn't think I'd be talking.
And I'm lining up my chakras. I'm lighting the white, California white sage. I've got crystals. I've got, and I got pictures of him. Later on, I'm listening to meditation music. And on this day, I picked up a pen because I started getting messages from him. And literally, this was the first one, and it was a bit of a shock to me that he tells me.
So this is the first time he's coming
through. The very
through.
first time he's come, I felt him.
Yes.
I felt his presence. It's like a beach. It's beautiful. It's pink and warm, but the colors are soft and vibrant. Pink, blues, and strong green. The air is warm surrounding us. It's air and love. It's love air everywhere. Nothing hurts. Warm and happy. Always young. Miss you, Dad, but I'll see you soon enough. Be nicer to Mom. Try to understand she feels alone. You don't. You know I'm here, and you feel me. She's not sure. This will change substantially in the coming year. No recall or bad memories about drowning. It's all warm and good. Just love. Remember the beach, the colors, the soft, warm breeze, but not a breeze. Don't be afraid of anything. Not health, not money, not the kids. I'm here. I'm on it. I'm sorry you hurt so bad, but no other way to get out gracefully. This is a big segment for the first visit. You get it. You know. You've been there. I love my friends. I told you they were great, loving friends. They came through.
So this is a powerful moment between you and Christopher,
Right.
and you have a lesson to learn about forgiveness. He has a lesson to share with you.
Right. He said to me, don't be mad at Scotty. He's just him. Feel me, Pop, around the back of your neck. It's me. I'm crying too. Just glad to be with you. What that was his friend Scotty, whose family owned the lake house. It wasn't his fault. They could have been anywhere. They could have been at my house, somebody else's house. But I already figured out I couldn't be mad at God. So I was holding on to resentment. I'm Irish.
Got to go somewhere.
Right? I'm Irish, and the Irish Alzheimer's, which you forget everything but the grudges.
I'm
right?
Irish.
Right?
I get it. Yeah.
Forgive and remember. So I was holding this resentment, and he's telling me, let it go. And so I said, okay, of course, anything for you, I'll let it go. Scotty was just being him. I loved him, and he loved me, he told me. So when would I see him again, anyhow? So when would I need to be kind? So, okay.
Chris works on this stuff really fast.
Right. 12 hours later, fast forward, at his grave, I get a text at 2:30 that say, from his fraternity brothers, hey, Mr. McHugh, we're all going to meet at 2:30 at his grave. Could you swing by? So Sally and I were going to meet later on for a little bit of a ceremony at the grave. So I said, yeah, sure, I'll swing by. And as I get there, I just seen these cars pull up. 60 kids get out from college, high school, grammar school, impromptu. That whole culture, right?
Chris traveled in a pack. He was a popular
always,
boy.
He was a
popular
animal.
boy.
He was. We had 2,000 people this week. 2,000 people. So I get there and I'm reveling in this. There's nothing I'd rather be here than around my boy and his pals. And I'm reveling in this. And then I see Scotty, heartbroken, crying. And I was able to embrace him and tell him I loved him. And so not only was Christopher giving me instructions, he was prepping me for a moment that was coming. And that was our first connection. And I doubted it, Kath, to be honest with you. And he would say to me, don't doubt this. And he said to me at one point, he said, you were my rock, Pop. He said, I know you're embarrassed to write it, just write it down. So I then took this to Andrew Anderson, eventually Thomas John, who was this world famous. And I said, is this me? And they said, no, that's your son. That's how he communicates with you. Embrace it. Run with it. Open up. You got a gift. You're lucky. Take that to heart. So it was my first communication with him. It was about 3 pages that I wrote down, put it in the file, and this continued to happen, every couple weeks. And so now it's fast forward to February, and Sally and my wife and her brother are talking about how tenacious Chris was when he played hide and seek. And it came to me that some of this is hiding. And the original name of the book was going to be Hide Again, My Search for Christopher on the Other Side, because he'd hide. You'd find him and he'd say, hide again. And just cute 2-year-old voice and go hide. And you'd find him, hide again, and he would take off. And it was just heartwarming. So I thought, he's hiding, but he's not. But I need to find him. And I walked up to my office and started writing. And so the bottom line is this book was in the plan all along. I thought these were notes for me. But the truth of the matter is, as he's told me later on, that I need to do this work. And he would say, you can't fold in, Pop. You can't slow down. You have to write this book. There's fathers that need to know. And somehow, people like you, Kath, bring out the message that it's okay for women to heal by group, that somehow men are getting the message
Be
that
stoic
it's not,
and hold those
right?
feelings
Suck
in.
it up, buttercup, right? And it's heartbreaking, heartbreaking to me, because they're not gone. The best message is that they're still here. Susan Geisman wrote a book, and I'm doing her show in July, that said, or September, I believe. She wrote a book called Still Right Here. That's the message. People ask me all the time, what's the message? That they're not gone, but you got to find them.
You still can grieve the physical presence, but you have this different, unusual connection. You call it spirit.
Right.
Clearly, Christopher is a spirit. He's a very lively spirit with a very similar personality on the other side of the veil.
Tenacious.
And spirit writing is what you call this.
Right.
So let's talk about that. What is spirit writing?
That's funny, because I'm new at this.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I started this path when my son crossed over and I needed to find out. Or, to be honest with you, either find out what's there, or if it's not, cross it off the list, right? But I wasn't willing to just go quietly, and take what was told to me, that he's buried and whatever. So I worked very hard at reaching my soul deeply so I could connect with him. Then I found out about raising my consciousness and energy level, things that you wouldn't expect a guy like me to find out. So I'm visiting his godmother, who's on the other side with him right now, my beloved sister, who was his Aunt Marcia, his godmother. He adored her. And she completely, totally accepted him as he was, all the time. And I was visiting her. She was preparing to die from cancer. And so I was doing some editing, literally editing. And I just finished reading this book of Bob Olson's, and he described what automatic writing was. And I had called this automatic writing in the book. Now, I hadn't sent the book to a publisher. It was still in a manuscript form. But I read the definition of automatic writing and was like, damn. Automatic writing, you go into a trance, you write in somebody else's handwriting, and you have no recall of what you wrote. It's not what I'm doing. So then I investigated further, and it's either spirit writing or channel writing, that it's messages from somebody channeling through me from the other side. I literally take dictation. This weekend I've been around. It was a book signing here as you attended, so it's very nice of you. And people have asked, like, you ask questions. With mediums, I ask questions. Here, it's all dictating. He's giving me messages. I don't want to interrupt by trying to change the flow, to do anything different. I'm content with him giving me messages. I write them down. And it's dark. And so when he says goodbye, and he signs off and says, see ya, Pop, love you, going back now, right? Something along those lines. I then take a fine point pen and edit it so I can read what I've written, so that the next day it'll make sense to me. And then I put it in a file. And a lot of these pages I never touched until I was writing the book. And it was like, wow, that's cool. Wow, I didn't remember that. Isn't that amazing? So that's what it was. It was a combination of my spirit writing, meetings with mediums, across the board with many people as mediums. I could go into group readings. I don't like group readings. I don't like people all that much. I like spirit better than people. And so somebody, in a small group is not my style. But I've gone in order to see a guy like Thomas John with Sally and William, where he would come through and describe the tattoo that William just put on. Or we saw Rebecca Rosen. There was 100 people.
So Rebecca Rosen, the medium, she had some things to share with you.
Well, the interesting thing was Sally's first experience with the medium was before mine, other than the phone calls with Nancine. She went to Denver. A friend of hers had arranged for her to meet in a small group setting with Rebecca Rosen. And Christopher came through, even though it was just a few months after his crossing. And that's her story and her reading. But one thing that she said, he loves you and he's sending you Reese's peanut butter cups. Now, unbeknownst to me, is Sally would send Chris peanut butter cups, whether it's the fraternity or the ranch or at the school, because she knew he loved them as just a sign. So he was sending it back as a symbol of him loving her. So we had seen, she had come in, there's probably 150 people in a hotel ballroom, and we're square in the middle. And of course I'm thinking like, damn, I should have bought VIP. Like, it matters to spirit if I'm
like where you're at.
Right?
That's our physical thing.
How do I duke a spirit and get moved up on the list?
They can go anywhere they want.
I know, they do what they want. So she came walking through it square in the middle, and she said, Christopher's here. He says, happy birthday to Charlie. She said he acknowledges who's the connection to country music, and Sally and I both claimed it. He said he's playing a song called Live Like You Were Dying. Does this make sense to you? We have this band that went to the ranch and played, and Jimmy was involved in it. And we do a show after the golf outing in September. And most of these guys are real musicians, and we've written some songs together. But the core of it is the Tim McGraw song "Live Like You Were Dying." And
yes.
And if you haven't heard it, after the interview,
it's an amazing
please
song.
Listen. It's a wonderful video, and it's just about eking every moment out of a day, because this could be your last. And that's the song who identifies who we are as this group that plays. And she said, Christopher's sending the song, Lives Like You Were Dying. He wants to know who has the tattoo, or Chris is saying that who has the tattoo with the wings on it with the flying buffalo. And that was his roommate, Raul, who had that tattoo put on his shoulder. Subsequent mediums have said to me, Chris acknowledges in Raul and says, on the phone in my office, that he just gave you a lamp. On the third anniversary, Raul gave me a Himalayan salt lamp, which burns 24 hours a day in my office. So these are kind of the events that continue to take place and continue to take place. And I'm never not in awe. I've grown to expect him to come through, and I do, and he does almost all the time.
He is one intense little spirit who
funny
perseveres.
as hell. The thing
He
is,
was funny he was funny
he
here.
was very funny here. He said one time I was early on, and this was on the phone, and I said to Nancy, and she said, "Do you have anything to ask him?" And I said, "Ask him if I ever came up short." And Nancy laughed, and she said, "He's funny." He said, "God, no, you never came up short, Pop. You are short, but you never came up short." And she said, "And now he's laughing at your haircut." So that's, he's still a funny, glib, personable, wonderful spirit. Like I said, we had 2,000 people at his wake.
Yeah, I was there. It was pretty amazing and overwhelming. And
overwhelming.
What I love is that you talk in the book a lot about the personality that they are here carries over on the other side. And Christopher, he is one intense being over there, and he wants to learn. Right. He's very curious. He was curious here. He's even more curious there to learn and evolve, and then to share this with you so you can help others.
I'm an ambassador, and he uses that term a lot. He said, "You're a good ambassador, Pop. Your boots on the ground. They'll listen to you. You got to keep doing this." And he said, here's an interesting thing. Some of the reasons that I know this isn't me putting a Band-Aid on my grief is that I wasn't ready to forgive Scotty, yet that's a message I'm given. One time he used an analogy in the book and said, life should be simpler, like a canoe cutting through a lake. And I'm thinking, do you think I would ever use that analogy? I won't. That would never be something I would use. So that he's constantly reinforcing that it's him bringing these messages to me, and that I have a responsibility to carry it on. In AA, they have something that said you got to give it away to speak, to keep it. I spoke at a meeting today with about 250 people to give the message of recovery, experience, strength, and hope. And this is not a whole lot different. This is, I'm giving this gift. And if I hoard this, I might lose it. And I'm not going to lose this.
And also, like you said, I believe it might have been at the book signing the other day, connecting with him in order to, you have to keep doing this to keep the connection, or at least there's that feeling and that belief.
And I'll sit down and I'll get, "Where you been, Pop? Where you been?" It's like I get reprimanded by my kid on the other side. And because, maybe I was too tired to get up a couple days earlier and I was getting, called. I've been at his grave. And as I said, I go to his grave all the time. I smoke a cigar. It's a great place to connect. I saw Thomas John in person, which was like meet with Mickey Mantle. And he said, "You go to the grave a lot, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Like, when was the last time?" I said, "Yesterday." And he said, "Usually I tell parents don't do that. It's a waste of time. But I'm telling you, that's a great energy for you too. You keep doing that."
You feel it in here, actually. When you talk about your experiences there, it's a very uplifting, what comes through. Let's talk about his greatest lessons. Some of his greatest lessons are around love. What he's learned on the other side about love, what he wasn't able to experience here on Earth, even though he was given a lot of love. Obviously, I know you and Sally very well, but he couldn't necessarily experience that love here. But when he crossed over, it's a whole different experience, and he's sharing that with you, so you'll share it with others.
The one thing I'm going to step back when you were talking about him growing over there. He was a terrible student here, and he said, "I'm not now. I'm one of the smartest guys in the room now," and he laughed. And he said to me at one point, "Hey, Dad, I'm moving up to a different level, but don't worry, it won't affect the communication. It's kind of like a long distance call from Tucson or Los Angeles. It doesn't matter. The connection's still there." And so he wanted me, because he knew that in my selfish way, his growth may cause our connection to diminish, and it didn't.
Well, as his vibration obviously continues to rise through the work that he's doing, you were not sure you'd be able to take that, channel, but that has no impact whatsoever.
None. And here's one from July 3rd. "Hi, Pop. 18 months a day, it's all the same. Love is clearer here, and I love you. Always did. But now I understand love, your love. I understand your love now. Your dad's love from you. I know what pure love feels like and looks like. It's an awakening on a new learning, like speaking French, which I do now. Now I get it." The bottom line is, And I was told by mediums that he kind of took this intense love that we had for granted then, and he doesn't now. So I love you, Chris.
We know you do. You can feel it, and you guys, I mean, I cannot say enough about this book as far as if you've lost a loved one. This is a book that is immensely healing. And let's talk about that.
Sure.
Healing grief, okay? Right. Grief is something, it's a process, and it never really goes away. And I think there's a point in the book where you talk about potentially, maybe it was you or Sally saying that you were afraid maybe Chris's friends would stop grieving and stop remembering him. But he teaches you a lesson, doesn't he, about grief?
And it was Sally said to me, I think it was after the first or second anniversary, we were, or it was leading up to that, we were worried about nobody showing up at the grave and that they might be moving on. And Chris told me later on that they're healing, but they'll never forget him. They loved him and he loved them. And that'll sustain. Well, these kids are still part of our lives. They had they had a pub crawl on his birthday.
It's an annual
weekend. It's the third annual, and 65 kids showed up. It's the third annual. They've got jobs now. They're out of college. Some of them are married. Yet in mass, they come together to love and honor their pal. And he's part of their lives. And I've gotten some amazing contacts from them. There's one that's not in this book that I did a book signing at. It was the first one I did at Winnetka Community House. It was sold out. It was wonderful. It was great. And a medium, Andrew Anderson, walked up to Gally Gannett, who was his childhood love and loved through the 20s. They were very close, and they broke up because of young teens and
immaturity, whatever.
Immaturity. But there was this strong love for each other. Andrew Anderson walked up to her and said, "Look, I know Joe, and I channel Chris all the time, and he's always right next to his dad." He said, "But during this whole event, he's been next to you. You must be somebody important to him." And then he did a reading with her later on that was unbelievable, where they healed and they said they loved each other. And Chris said he'd help her. He would help find the right spouse for her when the time was right. But those are the miracles that I'm still given. How lucky am I? And I mean this when I say this. People say things to try to be supportive and loving.
They say stupid things you talk about in one of your interviews, maybe. Right. They don't, of course. We don't know what to say, especially if we haven't lost a child.
Right. And so, time heals all wounds. No, there's a wonderful movie called In Manchester by the Sea. And the woman lost some children in a fire. And she was making amends to her ex-husband and said, "You've got to understand, my heart is broken. It'll always be broken. My heart will never not be broken. I have moments of pure joy. Often Chris is around during them. I have fun. I have a full life. I have the responsibility of being a dad, a husband, which I take seriously. But I'll go through the rest of my life with a broken heart. But it functions, and there's plenty of joy in my life. But that'll never change. And when a parent loses a kid, their heart's always going to stay broken. And so as long as you take the tools so that you can get through this, and it doesn't overwhelm you for more than short periods. It does overwhelm you, but for more than short periods, you're going to be okay. Because the bottom line is you're going to see your kids. You can feel them now, or see them now, or hear them now, and then you're going to be with them again in a not too distant future.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about grief. You share in there was another life-defining moment, a way you were able to see grief in a whole new way, in that clearly the immense grief that you are feeling is equal to the love.
Right. Well, it's 3.5 years later, and I'm not getting through this without a few stops and stalls. So I don't want to not feel Chris, even if it's painful.
Yeah.
It's like a little bit of a little tsunami every day. Sometimes a couple times a day, sometimes every other day, but it's pretty common that I'll be driving, I'll be walking, something will happen. I'll see a blonde-headed kid walk down the street and my heart falls and I need to cry. And I need to process it and let it overwhelm me go back out to sea wherever it goes, and get on with my day. I'm not willing to let go of that because to me, that's an indication of how much I love him. It would be different if it stopped me from being able to function, which it doesn't. I don't want to heal this away. Mm-hmm. This grief is part of my life, and I've made peace with it. And I'm grateful for it.
It's a healing process, but that grief keeps you connected to your son and the love.
That's a perfect way to put it. I know I'm connected to Chris because of this feeling that I have. It is directly proportional to how much love we had for each other.
If you had to distill this book down to one message, what is it?
They're still here, you know. And a lot of this is about a kid, but, you know, one of my dearest friends in the world lost his wife 15 years ago to cancer. And he was a nice guide for me. And he was the guy that said to me, you know, people are going to say things that are really stupid. He said, but can I ask you to show some restraint? He said, because I spent the first 6 months telling people how stupid they were. And I spent the next couple of years trying to make amends, you know, try to build fences. He said, so just understand that people are limited in their exposure to this. You know, I called him the other day and just said, Alan, geez, it's 3.5 years later. And I said, I'm having a horrible morning. And he said, you know, yeah, it's been 15 years for me. You know, just embrace it. You know, it's a morning, but it's not going to go away. It'll never change, you know.
Chris lost 3 friends that day. It was 4 boys.
Yeah.
And has this been helpful in helping them heal? The parents, the families?
You know what? I've had no connection. That because New Trier was such a, there was like 1,500 kids in their class, right? That's a small town. I didn't know 2 of the families, and I didn't feel like building a connection over grief or heartbreak when this first happened. The other young man, Patrick, we knew him and loved him, and his family are doing what they got to do to heal their grief. But it hasn't been a community of that.
Everyone has their own path here,
right.
And this is your path.
And I get a lot of feedback from email, text, from people who've heard radio. One guy showed up from somewhere outside of here, north of here, who had heard me on a radio station, coast to coast, and couldn't wait to come in and embrace because he lost somebody he loved. You know, so I get a lot of feedback, and specifically from parents, that this is the one that they can connect to.
You're doing some amazing work. Clearly, this is a book I cannot recommend highly enough. My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. If you guys have experienced grief, loss of any kind, this book you'll find some answers here, potentially expanding your mindset,
right.
And new ways of thinking. So we do need to wrap up and make sure people know where to find you, where to find the book,
great.
What things you have coming up, how they can connect with you.
Right. So that's great. Thank you, Kat. So My Search for Christopher on the Other Side, it's on Amazon, Kindle, Audible, you know, in print. I'm good Audible, and I was very relieved that the guy who did the Audible, I didn't have a choice. I'm a first-time author. The nuances, the sound, I loved it. And I listen to books all the time. I listen to this all the time, and it makes me feel closer to him. So I also have a website, mysearchforchristopher.com. Contact information. You know, my email is jbmcquillen@gmail.com. You want to reach out, you need to talk, you want to touch base. You know, this is a very important part of my life now and going forward. And if I can relieve a little pain or provide a few basic answers, because remember, I'm pretty new at this, I'm sure happy to help.
You were doing an amazing thing here through the work that you were doing, through your own grief and sharing your story and sharing Christopher's story, and really helping us see another side that many of us may never see, the other side of the veil.
Right. It's thinning, Kath. It's thinning.
Yeah. It is thinning, which is a very good thing.
Right.
So we get to get our sludges, you know, us like cosmic sludges. It's a little heavier, denser energy. We can actually get through now a lot more easily if we just do some simple things. And you guys will find those actually in here. There are amazing tips in there to, you know, you really share your process of how you elevate your own vibration and simple things, meditation, like you said, sage, crystals, chakra clearing. There's lots of meditations for that. So you guys, thank you so much for being here.
And it's always good to see you.
Always good to see you and my dear Sal. So give her my love. And, you know, this has been an incredible journey. And I cannot wait. Sally will be here. Her book will be here. I know she has her own story to share.
Yeah.
You guys, Again, My Search for Christopher, cannot recommend it enough if you're feeling any type of grief, plus a curiosity maybe to learn about metaphysics, which is just beyond the physical. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being part of the Forever Fierce Revolution. And we do hope that you'll get this book and heal your own grief, find your own healing journey, your own path. So with that, thank you for being here, and cheers, beauties. Stay fierce.